Hey everyone, welcome back to Bagel TCG. Today we're going to go over how to pick your starting hero. I'm glad you're interested in Flesh and Blood, but there's a lot of heroes to choose from, so it's hard to decide what to pick. First, we're going to go over some quick terms. There's two important things to know about. This is going to be a Blitz guide, and Blitz there's two strategies, right? You can go tall or go wide. So in Flesh and Blood that means either one really big attack a turn or many smaller attacks, right? And you can also be aggressive, aggro, or control, right? Most decks in Blitz are aggro, trying to kill the opponent as quick as possible. That's an easier game plan to accomplish because 20 life is pretty low. And there are a few control decks that are trying to use defense reactions and efficient blocks to slow the opponent down and get slow tempo and slow damage in until they can eventually kill the opponent. We're going to go over some of the go tall aggro decks first. So we've got Rhinar, who is pretty much always a go tall deck. He's trying to play exclusively attacks that deal 6 or more damage, because when he discards a 6 or more damage attack, he intimidates, which is a very strong ability. And if you like being aggressive and just repeatedly every turn swinging in for a ton of damage and one really big attack, Reinhardt's the hero for you. I'd say he's on the easier end of the spectrum. A lot of the Welcome to Wrath heroes are a lot more simplified. They don't have talents or anything like that, so if you're starting out, the Welcome to Wrath heroes are a great starting point. Dorinthia can usually go tall, and that's usually her stronger build. She can go wide also, but for the sake of this, I'm just talking about like the best builds for them. Dorinthia is a great go tall hero. She's also fairly simple. Instead of using big attack actions like Rhinar, she's using her weapon and using a lot of attack reaction buffs to make it a very big weapon swing, and you're trying to get in for two of those a turn, so a little bit of wide. The really go wide decks can do more, but usually for Dorinthia, you're trying to do two really big weapon swings a turn for, 8 each or something, and really trying to slam into the opponent. She's what I started out with, and she's also a pretty simple deck. So if you're new to the game, you like swinging for big attacks and just repeatedly hitting your opponent with large damage. I recommend Rhinar if you like big attack actions, or Dorinthia if you want to use your weapon. Moving into some a little more advanced heroes, Levia is a little harder to manage. Her attacks make you manage your graveyard, and because most of her big swings require you to banish 3 cards from graveyard, so she's a little more complicated. But she's also a brute. She uses shadow cards, so she's using a little extra over Rhinar. And she's also not as powerful. There are some big Levia fans who really enjoy her, but she's not in the strongest hierarchy of heroes right now, while for example, Dorinthia is pretty strong in Blitz. But Levia, she's okay, and she's a little complicated. So I wouldn't recommend her to newer players. But if you really enjoy Rhinar, you can maybe jump over to Levia. Kano is probably the hardest hero in the game. He starts out at less life, and he has really complicated lines. He tries to use his hero ability to repeatedly pitch blues, banish the top card of his deck, and just go off on either your turn or the opponent's turn. He's really complicated gameplay, and I don't recommend him for beginners. But if you really want to dive into a really complicated hero that can throw out really strong actions that deal a lot of arcane damage, Kano is probably the third strongest hero in Blitz, and people could argue around where he is, but he's very strong. But for beginners, I wouldn't recommend Kano, and honestly, I still can barely understand him. So Kano, a little difficult. If you want to go tall hero to start out with, I would recommend Rhinar or Dorinthia. Dorinthia is considered stronger right now, so if you're just going for pure power 2, Dorinthia is a great place to start. Going to the go wide aggro decks, we've got Chain, Azalea, Dash, and Bolton. Uh, Dash is going to be the easiest of these heroes. She uses a deck full of only Mechanologist cards that use the mechanic boost, which when you attack with a boost attack action, you banish the top card of your deck, and if it's also a mech card, which all your cards are, you go again. So she swings with a few boost cards every turn and just applies pressure. She's kind of in the mid tier right now, but if you want a very simple, powerful, aggressive go wide deck, Dash is where you want to start. Bolton's a little more advanced, and he goes wide with either 2 axes or 2 sabers or his Raiden weapon. He has a lot of different weapon choices, and he swings out with a bunch of attacks with a mix of weapon and attack actions. So he's a little complicated, and I wouldn't recommend him for beginners. If you want to start out going wide, I recommend Dash. Azalea is probably the weakest hero in the game right now. She hopefully will be getting some new powerful cards in the next set, but for now, I wouldn't really recommend Azalea unless you don't mind playing the weakest deck. But she has a really interesting mechanic where she arsenals her arrows and shoots them out, and she can try to do multiple arrows in a turn. She can maybe go tall depending on how you build her, but she's kind of in a weird spot. Chain is probably also in the top three strongest blitz decks. He's very, very strong, and he tries to swing a bunch of attack actions every turn by banishing and just having a massive, massive tempo. He's very, very powerful. He's probably the strongest hero in blitz and in constructed, but he takes quite a lot of skill. You have to keep track of what you're pitching and what you're banishing, and he just takes a lot of energy to play, and he's very complicated. So I wouldn't recommend him for beginners. But he is very powerful, so if you want to pick up the strongest deck, Chain is what I would go for. And he's still good even if you're not amazing at the game yet. So the more you play him, the better you'll get. So if you want to pick up a deck that is very complicated and aggressive and goes wide, Chain's a great place to start. There's less mid-ranger control decks. Bravo is probably the only great go tall mid-ranger control deck in Blitz. He swings for absolutely massive attacks after using his very good defense reactions to block. So he's trying to use his hero ability, and he's trying to pitch two blues basically, and use his hero ability and then a 4 cost-ish attack to swing in for a large dominate attack, right? And then use his other two cards for blocking usually. So if you want to be good at defending yourself with your Guardian and then swing in for big attacks, he's pretty strong and he's in the middle tier. And then Viserai tries to set up lots of rune chants, and or you can play a good tall control build where you set up a lot of rune chants and then swing in for a bunch, or you can do a mid-range build where you do a kind of a tempo of rune chants. But these are both kind of middle tier heroes. Bravo's a little better, but they're neither of them are amazing in Blitz. Now, at last, we have the go wide mid ranger control heroes. Ira is probably the strongest or the second strongest hero in Blitz. It's her, Kano, and Chain, and she's probably the easiest of the top three to play. She's has pretty simple gameplay where you're using her really powerful flick flacks and other defense reactions to block your opponent's attacks, and then swing in with consistent Kodachi damage. Her second attack, it gets +1, so just by pitching any 0 cost that's for 2 or 3, her Kodachis will swing in for 3 every turn. So she is able to block and then swing back with just 1 card for very consistent damage. Katsu, there is honestly not a ton of reason to play because he's basically a weaker version of Ira here. So there's not a ton of reason to go Katsu unless you really enjoy his gameplay. He's more complicated than Ira. Ira's pretty easy, but Katsu you kind of have to understand combo lines and how to use his hero ability to make them happen. But if you want a kind of complicated hero that's a little weaker, he's a bit mid tier compared to Ira being top tier. He has rewarding gameplay and he's a bit more aggressive than Ira, but is still considered mid-ranger control because he uses a lot of defense reactions. Lastly, we've got Prism, who's a pretty strong hero. She's also kind of upper mid tier, and you can play her in an aggressive game plan, but I think stronger is her control a mid-range game plan, where you're making a lot of your spectral shields that'll swing for 1 when you've got a Luminaris, and they'll all have go again if you have a yellow pitch, right? So you're going to be doing a lot of blocking and setting up your auras for kind of a grindy, just getting a lot of value, right? So Prism is good if you kind of like that gameplay. I hope I didn't talk too fast and that all made sense. If you're a new player and you like to be aggressive, I would recommend between Rhino or Dorinthia for a big go tall game plan, swinging for a lot of damage and 1 or 2 big hits. If you like to go wider, I would recommend Dash, or if you want a bit of a challenge and to play a very strong hero, I recommend Chain. And if you like to be controlly, I really recommend Ira. She's very powerful as well and has a kind of fun gameplay of blocking and then swinging back for chip damage until your opponent dies, right? So it's all up to how you like to play. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, but I hope that gives you some kind of idea of what each hero does and who you should pick. Thanks for watching.